The road was empty. The night was black. And the dog wouldn't stop staring. Ronan Hale had driven this stretch of Redstone Marsh 100 times. He knew every pothole, every dead oak, every mile of nothing. But his Belgian Malinois, Aries, a dog trained to find the dying, pressed both front paws flat against the dash and held still. That's when Ronan saw the wreckage. A woman, face down in the mud, badge glinting under his headlights like a warning. She grabbed his arm before he could speak. "Don't call anyone," she rasped. "They're already inside." Before we go any further, if you've never seen this channel before, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week I bring you stories like this one, high stakes, cinematic, and built to keep you up at night. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The storm had been building since early afternoon. By the time Ronan Hale crossed the county line into Redstone Marsh, the sky had turned the color of a bruise. That particular shade of greenish-black that old Gulf Coast fishermen called the warning. Lightning flickered somewhere south of the highway, distant and dry, like someone tapping a light switch behind a wall. The rain hadn't hit yet. That was the worst part. The stillness before. Ronan had the windows cracked 2 inches. Old habit. He always drove with the windows cracked just enough to let Aries read the air outside. The dog sat in the passenger seat with the focused stillness of a loaded weapon. 4 years of military service and 3 separate combat rotations had wired Aries in ways that no behavioral chart could fully explain. He didn't pant when he was anxious. He didn't pace. He got quiet, the kind of quiet that made rooms feel smaller. Right now, Aries was very quiet. "Easy," Ronan said, not looking at him. The dog's ears didn't move. Ronan had been out of the Navy for 14 months. He'd taken the discharge paperwork, signed where they told him to sign, shaken a few hands, and driven east until the Pacific was behind him and the Atlantic was still a rumor. He hadn't been looking for anything in particular. That was the honest answer, though he rarely gave it. He'd rented a room above a bait shop in Dunmore County, done some fence work, some roofing, turned down 2 job offers from a private security outfit whose business practices made his skin crawl, and mostly kept to himself. He was on his way back from a hardware run. Bags of concrete mix in the bed of the truck. That was the whole story. Aries moved. Not dramatically. The dog didn't do dramatic. Chant Akya. He simply rose from his seated position, planted both front paws on the dashboard, and pressed forward. His nose touched the glass. And then both front paws folded inward, pressing together against the dash in a gesture that looked almost ceremonial, like praying. Ronan had seen that exact movement twice before. Once in a collapsed building in Kandahar, once in a hotel corridor in Djibouti. Both times, someone had been dying inside. He hit the brakes. The truck fishtailed on wet asphalt before stopping sideways across both lanes. Ronan was out the door before the engine fully quit, boots hitting the road at a jog, flashlight already in his left hand. He swept the beam right. Nothing. Then left, down into the drainage ditch that ran along the shoulder. The SUV had gone off at speed. The front end was buried into the embankment at a steep angle, the driver's side door hanging open. The roof rack collapsed inward from where it had rolled at least once. Steam rose from the crumpled hood. The windshield was gone. Safety glass scattered across 10 feet of mud like rock salt. Ronan slid down the embankment sideways, one hand dragging through the mud for balance. She was lying 6 feet from the vehicle, face partially in standing water, one arm extended in front of her. She'd crawled. The drag marks in the mud made that clear. She had crawled away from the wreck before she ran out of whatever was keeping her upright. He rolled her carefully, checked her airway first, open, breathing. Then his flashlight found the entry wound, left side, just below the last rib punched clean through her jacket. The jacket itself had done some work. Heavy canvas material, soaked black now, pressing the wound in a way that might have slowed the bleeding or might have just kept her warm while she died. He couldn't tell yet. Her eyes opened. They were dark brown, and despite everything, sharp. "Don't move," Ronan said. Her hand found his sleeve. The grip was surprisingly strong for someone who'd been crawling through a ditch. "Don't call emergency services." Her voice was low, controlled, like she'd practiced staying calm under conditions worse than this. The county dispatch is compromised, and my department has a leak. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. You've got a gunshot wound. I'm aware. And you don't want me to call anyone. I want you to listen, right now, just for 30 seconds. Behind him, Aries had come down the embankment silently and now stood at the edge of the ditch, watching the road above. Not moving, just watching. Ronan trusted that more than anything else at the moment. If there was a vehicle approaching, Aries would have given a signal. He looked back down at the woman. 30 seconds, he said. Her name was Vivian Cross. She told him that in the first 5 seconds. Federal investigator, field division, 9 years on the job. She told him the rest in fragments, interrupting herself whenever the pain spiked. He could see it move through her face like a current, jaw tightening, eyes going glassy for a half second before she forced herself back. The shooting hadn't been a robbery. It hadn't been random. Someone had fed her location to a specific team, not local muscle, she was clear about that. The shot that hit her had come from distance, from elevation, from someone who knew what they were doing. The SUV had gone off the road when the second round hit the front left tire. She'd managed to unbuckle and crawl out before the disorientation fully set in. How far back was the shot? Ronan asked. 300 meters. Maybe more. Single shot before the tire. The first one missed. Missed where? My head. He absorbed that. Someone brought a rifle out here for you specifically. Yes. Which means they knew your route. She looked at him with the expression of someone who'd already done that math and hated every answer. Yes. Thunder finally cracked. Close now, the real thing, shaking the ground enough that Ronan felt it in his back teeth. The rain came hard a second later, the kind that arrives all at once, no warning, no build-up. Can you walk? He asked. I can try. Don't try. Tell me if you can do it, or if I'm carrying you, because I need to plan accordingly. She considered that seriously, which he appreciated. Carrying, she said. My legs are okay, but my core is gone. All right. He checked the wound again, pressed his folded work bandana firmly against it, guided her hand to hold it in place. Keep pressure. Don't let up. I know field dressing. Good. Then you know not to argue with me for the next few minutes. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one. He got her up the embankment in 2 stages, one arm under her knees and one behind her back, moving low and steady the way he'd been trained. Not fast, because fast got you injured twice. Aries moved ahead to the truck, circled it once, then sat by the passenger door. Clear. Ronan got her into the back seat, used the first aid kit from behind the driver's seat to build a proper pressure dressing over the wound, covered her with the one blanket he kept rolled in the corner of the back seat. Old gear habit, the blanket had been there for 2 years, and then stood outside in the rain for 20 seconds thinking. He had 3 options. The nearest hospital was in Caldwell City, 42 minutes east. She'd said dispatch was compromised. He didn't know if that meant the hospital system too. Hospitals called police for gunshot wounds. That was the law, that was the procedure, and procedure meant paper trail, and paper trail meant whoever had shot her would know where she was within 2 hours. The nearest urgent care wasn't going to handle this. That was a fantasy. The third option was his grandfather's cabin. Malcolm Hale had built it himself in the mid-70s, 20 minutes off the main road into the Black Cypress wetlands, accessible by a single gravel track that barely showed up on satellite imagery because the cypress canopy closed over it completely. Malcolm had died 3 years ago and left Ronan the property along with a '94 truck and a box of Korean War medals that had belonged to a man none of them had ever met. Ronan had gone out there once after the discharge, sat on the porch for a weekend. Didn't do much. Came back to the bait shop and didn't think about it. The cabin had a generator, a water pump, a propane stove, and a well-stocked medicine cabinet that Malcolm, being a practical Gulf Coast man who'd seen hurricanes take down infrastructure for weeks at a time, had stocked like a man who expected to be cut off from civilization periodically. Ronan climbed back into the driver's seat. "Where are we going?" Vivian asked from the back. "Somewhere they can't find you." He started the engine. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible." "That's honest." "I'm always honest when I'm bleeding." The gravel track into the Black Cypress wetlands was exactly as bad as Ronan remembered. 14 minutes of ruts, standing water, low branches dragging across the roof of the truck like fingers. He drove with the headlights on low, which gave him almost nothing, but that was the point. Anything brighter would punch through the tree line. Aries had moved to the back seat, not beside Vivian, but at her feet. The dog had made that choice himself. Ronan didn't comment on it. "Tell me about the card," he said. A pause from the back seat. "What card?" "You keep touching your jacket. Left inside pocket. You've done it 4 times since we got moving." Another pause. Longer. "Micro SD," she said. 8 months of undercover work, source files, recordings, financial records, shipment manifests. Everything compressed and encrypted. Her voice flattened, took on the factual tone people used when they were describing things that mattered too much to say dramatically. "There's a company called Silver Creek Transport. Legitimate freight operation on paper. Military logistics contracts, government clearances, clean safety record. In practice, they've been running a human trafficking pipeline for at least 3 years. Moving people the way you'd move cargo, using military infrastructure, military routes, cleared vehicles that don't get inspected." Ronan said nothing. He navigated around a flooded section of the track. "The officers involved," she continued, "they're not low level. They have rank, real rank, enough to authorize shipments, bypass checkpoints, make paperwork disappear." She stopped, breathed. He could hear the pain in it. "Someone in my agency handed them my location. That's the only explanation. My route tonight was not in any system. I planned it this morning and told no one except my direct contact, which means my direct contact is either compromised or the source." "Yes." He pulled up to the cabin and cut the engine. The rain was still heavy. The cabin was dark, the way abandoned things are dark. Not just lightless, but settled. A specific kind of quiet that buildings develop when nobody's been inside them for a while. "Can you give me 2 minutes?" he asked. "To do what?" "Clear the building." She didn't argue. He and Aries went in without the flashlight. He moved the way he'd been trained, low, using the ambient light from outside, checking corners, doorways, the back room. 14 months out of service and the muscle memory was still exactly where he'd left it. That was the thing about that kind of training. It didn't atrophy. It just waited, clear, all of it. He got Vivian inside, onto the cot in the back room, found the lantern, battery-powered. Malcolm had converted it years ago, and clicked it on, low setting, found the first aid cabinet. "This is going to be unpleasant," he said, pulling out what he needed. I gathered. He worked carefully and without speaking for a while. The wound was through and through. The round had entered below the last rib and exited cleanly through the lateral flank, missing the kidney by what the laws of physics apparently decided was enough. Lucky. Professionally unlucky in every other regard, but anatomically lucky. He packed it, redressed it properly, gave her 2 of the antibiotics from the sealed kit Malcolm had never opened. "You've done this before," Vivian said. Not a question. "Once or twice?" "Military?" "Navy, K-9 handler, but in practice the job description was flexible." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that's not a conversation for right now." She accepted that. Closed her eyes for a moment. He thought she was going to go under, but she came back. "Ronan." She'd used his name. He'd told it to her in the truck. "There are names on that card. Officers, people in my agency, local officials. If that card disappears, it's not going anywhere. You don't know what you're involved in." "No," he agreed. "But I know that you're alive right now by about 2 inches of margin, and whoever wanted you dead is going to figure out you're not. So the question of what I'm involved in is already past the point of being relevant." She looked at him for a moment, really looked. Then Aries lifted his head. His ears went rigid, angled forward, locked on the wall facing the swamp. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just focused, the way he did when something was out there in the dark that didn't belong. Ronan moved to the window, kept the lantern below the sill. Through the rain-streaked glass, out across the black water of the wetlands, a searchlight swept slowly from left to right, then stopped, then moved again. A boat, maybe 2, combing the waterways. He stood there in the dark, watching the light move through the cypress trees, and felt the shape of the thing they were in settle over him like a physical weight. They hadn't escaped. They'd only made it to the next part of the hunt. The searchlight moved like something alive. Ronan stood at the window with the lantern killed and watched it sweep through the cypress trees in long, methodical arcs. The kind of pattern that told him whoever was operating it had done this before. Not panic searching, grid searching. There was a difference, and the difference mattered because panic searching was sloppy, and sloppy made mistakes. What he was watching out there in the black water was deliberate, patient. The light would hold on a section of bank for 3 or 4 seconds, then sweep, then hold again. Someone on that boat was reading the shoreline the way you read a page. Left to right, top to bottom, nothing skipped. There was a second light, farther south, moving parallel. 2 boats, at minimum. He stepped back from the window and let his eyes adjust back to the dark interior. The cabin was a single main room and a back bedroom, with a narrow bathroom that Malcolm had added in the 90s when his knees got bad enough that walking to the outhouse at night stopped being an option. The walls were thick, old-growth cypress planks, warped slightly with decades of humidity but solid, the kind of construction that didn't happen anymore. No insulation worth mentioning, but the wood itself absorbed sound reasonably well. Vivian was propped on the cot, watching him from the backroom doorway. She'd heard the change in his movement. He could tell by her posture. She'd gone from resting to alert the moment he left the window. "How many?" she asked. "2 lights. Could be more without lights." "They move fast?" "No, grid pattern. They're searching, not pursuing. They haven't found the track yet." She let out a slow breath. "How long before they do?" He thought about it honestly. The track entrance is off the main road about a 1/4 mile past the culvert. From the water, they'd have to come up the east bank to reach it, and that section is shallow. Unless they have a flat bottom, they'd have to walk it. And if they have a flat bottom, then we have maybe an hour. She nodded like she was receiving a field briefing, which in a way she was. "Options? We don't move you tonight. You move tonight, and that wound opens up, and we trade one problem for a faster one." He came back toward the cot, sat on the wooden chair across from her. "So the option is we stay quiet, we go dark, and we trust that the track looks like nothing from the water." "Which it does. I've driven past it 100 times without knowing it was there." "You knew it was there." "I had the deed." She almost smiled again, the ghost of a smile thing. He was starting to recognize it as her version of laughing. The rain hammered the roof. In the main room, a small leak Ronan hadn't noticed before was dripping steadily onto the floor near the wood stove, the sound a thin, irregular tick against the silence. He filed it away. In a few hours, that sound would be useful. It meant the roof was holding everywhere else. "Tell me about the officers," he said. "Why?" "Because if we're sitting here for the next 6 hours, I'd rather know what I'm dealing with." She studied him for a moment. The lantern was still off. The only light in the room came from the thin glow of the radio display on the windowsill, Malcolm's old weather band unit, which Ronan had switched on at low volume when they came in, barely audible, just enough to give him a baseline for the outside world. "2 of them confirmed," she said. "One I've only been able to establish probable cause on, not hard evidence." She shifted, winced, kept going. "The senior one is a logistics commander out of Beaumont Station, colonel level, on paper responsible for coordinating supply chain movements for 3 regional bases. In practice, he's been routing Silver Creek transport vehicles through cleared military corridors for at least 36 months. Vehicles that should be inspected aren't. Manifests that should be verified aren't. He has the authority to make that happen and the relationships to keep people from asking questions." "Name?" "On the card. Not something I'm saying out loud anywhere near a window." "Fair enough." "The second?" "Procurement officer, younger. He handles the paperwork side, contracts, clearances, interagency sign-offs. He's the one who makes Silver Creek look legitimate from the outside. Government contracts, good safety ratings, community partnerships." Her voice went flat at that last part. "They sponsor youth sports leagues. Did you know that? In 4 counties. Ronan didn't say anything. "The third one," she continued, "the one I only have circumstantial on, he's in my department. That's all I'm saying about that." "Someone who knew your route tonight. Someone who knew more than your route. Someone who's been managing what I find and what I don't find for possibly the last 4 months. She said it quietly, which made it land harder than if she'd said it with anger. I kept thinking I was close. I kept thinking the evidence was there. I just needed more time. And now I'm wondering if some of that time was manufactured. If someone was buying them time to cover their tracks while I thought I was building a case. The searchlight swept close enough that the edge of it grazed the tree line 50 yards from the cabin. Ronan watched the far wall lighten slightly, then go dark again. "What's on the card exactly?" he asked. "Shipment logs going back 2 years, financial transfers, shell accounts, offshore routing, some domestic. Recorded conversations, 6 of them, all admissible because of how I obtained them. Photographs of cargo manifests with names redacted that don't match any passenger lists. And the names." She paused. "Victims, partial list. People reported missing in 4 states over 3 years. Cross-referenced with Silver Creek's route schedules." He sat with that. "Dozens?" "The partial list has 41 names. I think the actual number is higher." The rain kept coming. The leak kept ticking. Aries had moved to the doorway between the 2 rooms and lay down across the threshold. Another old habit of his, positioning himself where he could monitor both spaces simultaneously. The dog's breathing was slow and even, but his eyes were open. "You need to sleep," Ronan said. "I need to not die." "Those aren't mutually exclusive. Sleep helps with the second one. Your body's had a significant insult tonight, and it needs resources to deal with it. If you fight the fatigue, you'll run down faster." She looked at him. "You sound like a corpsman." "I've spent a lot of time around corpsmen." "What happened to the dog?" she asked. It came out of nowhere, the kind of question people asked when they were trying to stay awake and their brain was looking for something to hold on to. "How did you end up with him?" "He was my working dog. When I got out, I applied to keep him. It's a process, lots of paperwork, evaluations. They approved it." "They don't always approve it." "No." "Why did they approve it for you?" He thought about how to answer that. "Because Aries had separation-related behavioral issues that made repartnering him difficult. And because I had a clean record and a stable discharge." He paused. "And because his previous handler before me had been killed and Aries had spent 8 weeks in a kennel not eating properly, and someone in the program decided that wasn't something worth perpetuating." She was quiet for a moment. "Where was his previous handler killed?" "Helmand Province, IED, on a road clearance operation." "I'm sorry." "Me too." That was the end of that conversation. Not because it was uncomfortable, or not only because of that, but because outside the second searchlight had stopped moving. Ronan was at the window before he'd consciously decided to move. The second light was holding position, not sweeping. Holding, pointed at something on the east bank of the waterway. Then voices. Distant, broken up by rain and distance, carried in fragments by the wind. He couldn't make out words, just the cadence. One voice, then another, shorter. Back and forth. The kind of exchange people had when they were deciding something. Then the light moved on. He exhaled slowly. "What was it?" Vivian asked from the back room. "Nothing. They're still searching." "You exhaled like it was something." He turned from the window. They stopped at the east bank, looked at something, moved on. "What's on the east bank?" "A stand of old cypress and about 40 yards of black water before the shallow section starts. If they have a flat bottom, the shallow section is what they'd have to cross to reach the track." He moved back to the chair. "They didn't cross it." "Tonight." "Tonight," he agreed. She closed her eyes. This time they stayed closed. He gave it 10 minutes before her breathing evened out into something that was close enough to sleep to count. He sat in the dark and listened to the rain and thought about the micro SD card in her jacket pocket and the 41 names on it and the searchlights moving through the cypress trees. And he thought about the fact that none of this was his problem in any way that a reasonable person would define the term. And he thought about what Aries had done on the dashboard, both paws pressed together, still as stone. And he thought about the last time the dog had done that, in a hotel corridor in Djibouti, outside a room where a source had been waiting to be extracted and had instead been found by the people who wanted her silenced first. They'd been 40 seconds too late that time. He was not going to be late again. That wasn't a decision he made so much as a fact he acknowledged, the way you acknowledged weather or the direction of a current. It simply was. He left Aries on watch and lay down on the main room floor with his jacket as a pillow and slept in 3-hour increments the way he'd trained himself to do, waking between each one to check the window. The searchlights were gone by 2 in the morning. That didn't make him feel better. It made him feel worse. He was up before first light. The rain had dropped to a drizzle, the heavy part of the storm having pushed northeast during the night. The cypress trees were silver and dripping in the gray pre-dawn, the waterway flat and dark and still. No boats, no lights, just the ordinary silence of a wetland morning, herons somewhere in the distance making their prehistoric sounds. Ronan stood on the back porch and drank cold water from a canteen and thought about logistics. The problem was the laptop. Vivian had mentioned it in the truck before the pain had gotten too bad. A secure government-issued laptop locked in the center console of the SUV, which contained her backup files and, more importantly, her encrypted communications channel to the one person in the agency she was still holding out hope might be clean. The micro SD card was the evidence. The laptop was the means to do something with it. Without the channel on that laptop, getting the evidence to the right people meant going through official chains that were, at minimum, partially compromised. She told him this at 3 in the morning when she woke up long enough to take more antibiotics and drink half a water bottle and inform him, in the precise and slightly pale manner of someone who had been cataloging their priorities while unconscious, that the laptop needed to be retrieved before anyone else found the wreck. "I'll go," he'd said. "It's in the center console. Lockbox 4-digit code. I'll give you the code." "Write it down." He'd found a stub of pencil in a paper bag from the hardware run, still in his jacket pocket. She'd written 4 numbers and handed it back. "Don't take anything else from the vehicle," she said. "If they're watching the wreck, I don't want them to know someone's been there." "Well, they'll know someone's been there. The driver's door was open when I found you." "A locked lockbox in a center console isn't obvious. They'll figure I was thrown clear and the laptop went with the vehicle. If the lockbox is intact and locked, that story holds. Unless they check it themselves. They won't know the code. They have people who don't need the code." She'd met his eyes in the dim light. "Then you need to get there first." That had been 3 hours ago. Now he was standing on the porch working through the route in his head, back up the gravel track onto the main road, 5 miles west to the site of the wreck. In daylight, on a road that a team of people with boats had been searching the night before. In his truck, which had been sitting at the side of the road for approximately 30 seconds before he'd driven it off highway last night. Long enough to be seen if anyone had been watching, long enough to be registered by a camera if there was one, which on this stretch of Redstone Marsh Highway there almost certainly was not. But almost certainly was not the same as certainly was not. He went over the variables and decided the window was now or not at all. The longer he waited, the more time whoever had organized last night's search had to regroup and position. Early morning gave him the best chance at the wreck being unattended. Even a professional team needed to rest, needed to rotate, and the gap between the end of a night search and the beginning of a day operation was usually the loosest point in coverage. He looked at Aries. "You stay," he said. The dog looked at him with an expression that communicated, with remarkable clarity, that he considered this a poor tactical decision. "I know, but she can't be here alone and conscious without someone to alert her if those boats come back." He crouched down, held the dog's face for a moment. "Guard!" Aries turned and went inside. Ronan took the truck. Yet, the highway was empty at that hour. He drove the speed limit exactly, which was the correct choice. Too fast drew attention. Too slow drew more. The wreck was right where he'd left it, the nose of the SUV still buried in the embankment, the driver's door still hanging. The rain had washed most of the blood off the asphalt. If you didn't know what had happened here, it looked like a straightforward single-vehicle accident, the kind of thing that happened on rural highways in bad weather with some regularity. Nothing remarkable. He pulled off 50 yards past the wreck, walked back along the shoulder, and went down into the ditch without hurrying. The center console was intact. The lockbox was right where she'd said, a standard government-issue steel unit bolted to the console frame. He punched the 4-digit code. The latch clicked. The laptop was inside, powered down. inside a neoprene sleeve. He pulled it out, zipped his jacket over it. He was back up the embankment in under 90 seconds. That's when he noticed the truck. It was parked on a logging access road about 60 yards east of the wreck site, barely visible between the tree line and the morning gray. A heavy-duty pickup, black, no markings, engine cold, but not cold enough to have been there all night. The tires were muddy in a specific way, the mud distribution suggesting it had come from the south, from the direction of the waterway access points the search boats had been using. Someone had come from the boats. Someone was here. He didn't stop walking, didn't look at the truck for more than 2 seconds, kept his pace even and his hands at his sides and covered the 50 yards to his own truck at exactly the speed of a man who had nothing to think about. Got in, started the engine. Pulled back onto the highway heading east. In his side mirror, he watched the logging access road. Nobody emerged, but that meant nothing. He was 3 miles down the road before he let himself breathe normally, and even then he took the long route back. East for 4 miles, then north on the county road, then west along the ridge before dropping back south toward the Black Cypress track. 11 extra miles in 20 minutes, but he arrived without a tail. He'd checked the mirror 40 times. He was reasonably certain. Reasonably. He pulled up to the cabin and sat in the truck for a moment with the engine running. Through the window of the back room, he could see the faint shape of the lantern. It was on. Low, but on. Vivian was awake. He got out, walked to the door, knocked twice in the specific pattern he'd told her about before leaving. 2 quick, 1 pause, 2 more, and heard Aries give a single quiet sound of acknowledgement from the other side. She was sitting up on the cot when he came in, jacket pulled back on over the dressing, her color better than last night, but still not what it should be. She had the small folding knife from her boot in her right hand. He clocked that immediately and didn't comment on it. "You're back," she said. "I'm back." He set the laptop on the cot beside her. "Got company at the wreck site. Black truck, logging road east of the site. Engine wasn't cold." She processed that. "Did they follow you?" "I don't believe so." "You don't believe so?" "No. I took a long route and monitored the whole way. Nothing definitive." "Nothing definitive isn't nothing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She put the knife away and opened the laptop. While it booted, she looked up at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of someone doing math on their situation and not loving the answers. "There was something else at the wreck site," she said. "Wasn't there?" He looked at her. "You've got a specific kind of face right now," she said. "Like you're deciding what to tell me." "There was a Silver Creek recovery truck," he said, "about 40 yards past the black truck. Engine was warm." The room went quiet except for the laptop's startup chime, which she immediately muted. "They sent a recovery crew," she said. "Looks like it." "For the vehicle? Or for what's in it?" She stared at the screen for a moment without seeing it. "They know I survived. Maybe. Or they're being thorough. In this operation, thorough and knowing are the same thing." She pressed her lips together. "They have people at the wreck. They have boats on the water, which means they've already established a perimeter around this general area, and they're tightening it." "Yes." "And the only reason they haven't found this cabin yet is because the track isn't on any map." "Yes." "How long does that hold?" He thought about it honestly, the way he had last night. If they start walking the bank in daylight, they'll find the track entrance within a few hours. Tire tracks in the mud from last night, even with the rain. Someone experienced reads those tracks and they follow them. He met her eyes. "We have a window. It's not a big one." She nodded slowly. Her hands had gone still on the keyboard. Then she started typing. "I need 30 minutes, she said. "For what?" "To reach the one person I still think might be clean." She glanced up. "And to figure out if I'm wrong about that too." He left her to it and went to stand at the main room window, watching the tree line with his hands in his pockets, and thought about the warm engine on that Silver Creek truck, and about the 41 names on the micro SD card, and about the fact that somewhere between here and the end of this, Someone with rank and resources and no shortage of people willing to do ugly work on their behalf was going to make another move. He just didn't know which direction it was coming from. Aries came and stood beside him. The dog leaned against his leg very slightly. Not a trained behavior, just something Aries did sometimes. A small, uncomplicated wait that meant exactly what it looked like it meant. They stood there together and watched the trees and waited for the window to close. Vivian had been typing for 20 minutes when she stopped. Not the gradual stopping of someone finishing a thought, but the sudden, complete stop of someone who had just read something that changed the shape of everything. Her hands came off the keyboard and settled flat on either side of the laptop, and she stared at the screen without blinking for long enough that Ronan turned from the window to look at her. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately. She read it again, whatever it was. Then she closed the laptop very carefully, the way you handled something fragile, and set it beside her on the cot. "My contact responded," she said. And he confirmed what I sent him. Location, timetable, Silver Creek's next movement. She looked up. Her face had done something complicated in the last 30 seconds. Not fear, not relief, something that sat between them uncomfortably. "He also told me that my department opened an internal review on me 4 days ago. Unauthorized evidence collection, procedural violations. The kind of paperwork that gets filed when someone wants to make sure that whatever a field investigator finds becomes inadmissible before it ever sees a courtroom." Ronan said nothing. He already knew where this went. "Someone in my own agency," she said, "is building a case against me while I'm out here bleeding in a swamp." She said it without heat. That was the part that got him. She said it with the flat, hollow tone of someone confirming something they'd already half known and had spent 2 weeks hoping was wrong. "They're not just trying to kill me. They're making sure that even if I survive, nothing I found is usable." "Who filed the review?" "My direct supervisor." He came away from the window and stood in the center of the room. Aries tracked the movement without lifting his head. "Your contact," Ronan said. "The one you just reached. You trust him?" "I trust him more than anyone else I know in that building," which is not the same as trusting him completely. Nothing in this job is the same as trusting anyone completely. She looked at the laptop. "But he's the one who flagged the review to me. If he were running the other side of this, he'd have let me find out some other way. Or not at all." "What did he tell you to do?" "He told me not to move the evidence through any federal channel. He said there's a local law enforcement officer, a county sheriff, whose name has come up clean in 3 separate background checks he ran informally. No financial irregularities, no connections to Silver Creek or to any of the logistics personnel. Long record, good reputation, the kind of man who's been offered jobs at the state level twice and turned them down both times because he didn't want to leave his county." She paused. "His name is Gideon Marsh." "I know who Gideon Marsh is." She looked at him. "You do." "Everybody in Dunmore County knows Gideon Marsh." He moved back toward the window. "He's been the sheriff here for 19 years. He buried his deputy last spring. Hunting accident, but Marsh handled the whole thing himself. Didn't let it get political, paid for part of the funeral out of his own pocket." He glanced back at her. "People in this county trust him the way they don't trust much else. My contact thinks he's the only viable option for getting this evidence into a legitimate proceeding without it being intercepted or buried." "That means going to him directly." "Yes." "In a vehicle, on roads that have people watching them." "Yes." He turned that over. Outside, a heron landed in the shallow water 20 yards from the back porch, moved through the reeds with its prehistoric patience, and then stopped and stood absolutely still. Ronan watched it for a moment. "She's going to need to be moved eventually regardless," he said, mostly to himself. "She is right here," Vivian said, "and she agrees." He turned back to face her. She had her hands on the edge of the cot and was in the process of pushing herself upright, which was either brave or stupid depending on your perspective and how much you understood about through-and-through gunshot wounds and the body's relationship with sudden movement at the wrong stage of healing. "Don't," he said. "I've been on this cot for 7 hours." "And you should be on it for another 12 at least." "We don't have another 12. She got to her feet. The color drained from her face for a moment. He watched it happen, watched her go white, and then force herself back through pure stubbornness. And then she steadied, one hand on the wall. I can move. I'm not fast and I'm not graceful, but I can move. Moving and moving under pressure are different things. I know that. If we have to run, then you run and I follow as best I can and we deal with the gap when we get to it. She met his eyes. I have spent 9 months on this investigation. I have 41 names on that card that belong to people who disappeared while a military officer signed paperwork and a transport company sponsored Little League games. I am not staying on this cot. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded once. All right, but we go on my timeline and you tell me the second you start losing ground. Not after, the second. Agreed. And you take the spare jacket. It's cold and you're running low. She started to argue and then stopped, which he took as a small but meaningful concession. He gave them 30 minutes to prepare. He used it methodically. Checked the truck, checked their supplies, moved the laptop into the same inside jacket pocket as the micro SD card on Vivian's person so that everything critical was in one place on one body. He left the cabin the way Malcolm had always left it, windows latched, door locked from outside, with the key that lived under the second porch board. Old habit of his grandfather's that had seemed quaint once and now seemed like exactly the right instinct. Aries loaded himself into the truck without being told. They made it 4 miles before the problem arrived. He'd been watching the mirrors since they pulled onto the main road. Traffic was light. A farm truck heading the opposite direction, a school bus doing its morning route 2 miles ahead of them, nothing behind. The road ran straight through the flat wetland country. Low pine on either side. The sky still overcast, but the rain fully stopped now. Everything that particular shade of washed-out gray that came after a Gulf Coast storm. Then a vehicle came off a side road half a mile behind them and settled into a following position. Not close. Not close at all. Staying back far enough that in normal circumstances you wouldn't think anything of it. But it matched their speed exactly when Ronan adjusted. And it took the same turn he took at the Palmetto Junction without any hesitation, and it had no markings, and it was black. Different vehicle from the logging road, or maybe the same one. He hadn't gotten close enough to read the plates at the wreck site, and he hadn't tried to now. Company? He said. Vivian adjusted the mirror on her side. She'd been watching too. How long? Since the Crestwood cutoff. That's 3 miles. Yes. She thought for a moment. They're not moving up. No. Which means they're either calling in our position or they're waiting for something. Or both, he said. He did not accelerate. He kept the truck at exactly 52 miles per hour, which was the speed he'd been doing, and he ran through the road layout ahead in his head. The county road they were on would feed into Route 9 in approximately 2 miles. Route 9 was the main corridor. More traffic, more visibility, more witnesses if something went wrong. The question was whether whoever was behind him wanted to move before they hit Route 9 or was comfortable following them onto it. There's a gas station at the Route 9 junction, he said, open at this hour. Cameras on the pumps. You want to stop? I want them to know I know they're there. She thought about it. If they're professionals, stopping won't deter them. It'll just tell them you're aware. I'm already aware. The question is whether being visibly aware changes their calculus. He watched the mirror. The black vehicle was still holding its distance, moving smoothly, unhurried. Professional surveillance tries to stay invisible. If I force the visibility question, they have to decide whether to push or pull back. Right now they're comfortable. I want them uncomfortable. And if they push? He didn't answer that immediately because Aries had stood up in the back seat. Not the dashboard gesture, not the paw thing. Just standing, weight forward, oriented toward the rear of the vehicle, his nose working the air through the cracked rear window in a way that made the hair on Ronan's forearms stand up. Because Aries only did that when something was proximate, close. The dog was designed for detection, and his detection radius was not theoretical. It was operational, trained, proven across 3 combat deployments, and what he was indicating right now was not a vehicle half a mile back. Something was closer. Ronan checked both mirrors. Road behind was clear except for the black vehicle. Road ahead was empty. Both shoulders were flat palmetto scrub, nowhere to hide a vehicle, nowhere to... The blue pickup came off the western shoulder track doing 60. It wasn't a track he'd seen because it wasn't on the road surface. It was a fire break cut through the scrub, barely wide enough for a vehicle. and whoever had been sitting in it had timed the move to catch him at the gap in the tree line where the sight angle was clear in both directions. The blue pickup hit the road ahead of him and braked hard, sideways, blocking both lanes. Ronan hit his own brakes, and the truck slid 8 feet on wet asphalt before stopping. The gap between his front bumper and the side of the blue pickup was approximately 12 feet. Behind him, the black vehicle had accelerated and was now 40 yards back and closing slowly. Not rushing. Positioning. A box. Clean, simple, textbook. One vehicle ahead, one behind. Nowhere to go left or right because the shoulder dropped off into drainage ditches on both sides. Vivian's hand had gone to her jacket, toward the place where she'd had her service weapon before the crash. He knew without asking that she was carrying nothing. She'd told him last night that her sidearm had gone into the ditch when the SUV rolled and she hadn't been in any condition to find it. The door of the blue pickup opened. The man who got out was not what Ronan had expected, and he'd learned a long time ago that the unexpected presentation was usually intentional. The man was somewhere in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a canvas work jacket and boots that had seen actual work. He moved with the unhurried, grounded quality of someone who had done physical things for a long time and had no performance anxiety about it, no visible weapon in his hands. He walked to approximately 20 feet from Ronan's front bumper and stopped. He looked at the truck for a moment. Then he looked directly at the driver's side and said, in a voice that was calm enough to carry without effort through the glass, "Miss Cross, my name is Gerald Purcell. I work for the people who are very concerned about your well-being. We have a medical team standing by. We just want to make sure you receive appropriate care." Vivian's breathing had changed. Not panic, yet she didn't panic, he'd established that by now, but a specific, careful stillness that meant she recognized either the name or the language. Ronan kept his hands on the wheel. "What do you want to do?" he said. Low, for her only. "That name," she said, equally low. "Gerald Purcell. He doesn't exist in any file I've ever read, which means he's either a contractor or he's using a cover. He's offering medical help. He's offering a reason to open the door." Purcell was still standing in front of the truck with his hands visible and his expression arranged into something that was trying hard to look like reasonable concern. "Miss Cross," he said again, "no one here wants this to get complicated. You're injured. You've had a very difficult night. The simplest thing in the world is to step out of that vehicle and let us take care of you." "Don't answer him," Vivian said. Ronan glanced in the mirror. The black vehicle had stopped. Nobody was getting out of it. They were holding the rear position, keeping him from reversing. The gap was maybe 30 feet now, close enough that he could make out 2 figures through the windshield. He did the math quickly and did not like the answers. He could not go backward. He could not go forward without going through Purcell, or over him, or through the pickup behind him. The ditches on both sides were deep. He'd seen them from the road 100 times. The standard Gulf Coast drainage cuts that ran maybe 4 feet deep and were filled with standing water after last night's rain. His truck had a decent ride height, but if he went into one of those at speed, he was going to lose control, and a rollover out here with Vivian's wound was not a survivable complication. Purcell took 1 step closer. "I'm going to ask you one more time." The calm in the man's voice was the tell. It was too consistent. No variation, no natural impatience, no flicker of the frustration that any normal person would feel standing in a road trying to reason with someone who wasn't responding. The calm was trained, managed. The same way a poker player managed their tell by eliminating it entirely, except it created its own tell in the absence. This man had done this before, many times, and it had not always ended with a conversation. Ronan looked at the blue pickup and measured the gap between its rear bumper and the edge of the northern ditch. It was approximately 4 feet. He looked at his own truck. Standard long bed, nearly 7 feet wide. 4 feet was not enough. But the front left corner of the blue pickup, the corner closest to the ditch, was not anchored to anything. It was sitting on asphalt with its emergency brake set probably, but emergency brakes on a flat road were not the same as immovable objects. They were friction, and friction had a threshold. It was a bad idea. It was the only idea. "Hold on to something," he said. "What?" He put the truck in reverse, backed up 3 feet to give himself the angle he needed, and then punched it forward and left, aimed not at Purcell and not at the center of the pickup, but at the front left quarter panel. catching it at an angle that was designed not to stop but to push. The impact was sharp and loud, and threw Vivian hard against the door despite the seatbelt. The blue pickup rotated maybe 30 degrees on the asphalt, its rear swinging toward the ditch, and Ronan kept his foot down, kept the torque going, kept pushing until the front left corner of the pickup dropped off the shoulder edge and the vehicle lurched sideways and the gap opened up. Not 4 feet, suddenly 8, and he was through it before the pickup settled, fishtailing, tires screaming, gravel from the shoulder spraying back into the ditch. In the mirror, Purcell was moving toward the black vehicle, which was already turning around. They were going to follow. Ronan put the truck at 70 and held it there on the wet road, hands tight on the wheel, watching the mirror. "Are you hit?" he said. "No." She had her hand braced against the dash. "The laptop?" "Still on you. Still on me." She checked. "Still on me." "Okay." She breathed. "Okay." Aries had been thrown against the back seat by the collision and had righted himself with the practiced efficiency of an animal that had ridden in military vehicles over worse terrain. He shook himself once and resumed his forward-facing position. The black vehicle appeared in the mirror about half a mile back, moving fast now, no more patience, no more careful positioning. The civility of Gerald Purcell and his reasonable voice and his visible hands had lasted exactly as long as it took to determine that it wasn't going to work. Now they were just running. Ronan took the first unmarked road north, then the next one east, then cut south on a logging track that he knew connected back to the county road above the Route 9 junction. The logging track was rough. Deep ruts from timber vehicles, standing water in the low sections, branches low enough that he could hear them dragging across the roof. He drove it at 45. That was too fast for the track, but too slow would let the black vehicle close the gap. And closing the gap was the thing he absolutely could not let happen. The truck bucked through a water crossing that was deeper than it looked, throwing mud up over the hood. Vivian gripped the handle above the door with white knuckles and said nothing. He came out the south end of the logging track onto the county road and turned east and held 70 again. And by the time he reached the Route 9 junction, the mirror was clear. He pulled into the gas station. He sat with the engine running for 30 seconds, watching the road behind them. Nothing came. "They lost us on the track," Vivian said. Her voice was steady but thin. "Or they're calling it in." "To who?" "That's the right question." He looked at her. She was pale, the effort of the last 10 minutes having cost her something she didn't have to spare. There was a small stain spreading on the right side of the spare jacket, not the wound side, which meant she'd hit the door hard enough in the collision to open something new. "You're bleeding." "I noticed." "How bad?" "Not bad. Skin, not deep." She checked it herself, pressed her hand against it. "Keep moving." "You sure?" "Ronan." She met his eyes. "Keep moving." He pulled back onto Route 9 heading north, toward Dunmore County proper, toward the 19-year sheriff with the clean record who had paid for half his deputy's funeral out of his own pocket. And he thought about Gerald Purcell's trained calm and the black vehicle and the blue pickup rotated into the ditch. And he thought about how cleanly that box had been set up. One vehicle already in position on a fire break, timing coordinated, no radio chatter he'd heard, which meant they were operating on a closed channel with good discipline. And he thought about the fact that they had located a truck they had never seen before on a road that Ronan had chosen that morning by instinct rather than plan, which meant the tracking wasn't on him. He glanced at Vivian. The laptop. He didn't say it out loud yet because he wasn't certain, and because saying it out loud in a moving vehicle with no way to act on it immediately served no purpose except to make the next 20 minutes worse. But he filed it in the front of his mind and left it there, turning it over like a problem that needed solving before they walked into a county sheriff's office with a wounded federal agent and a micro SD card full of evidence against a military officer and whatever else the next hour was going to produce. The road unspooled ahead of them. Aries lowered his head onto the center console between the front seats, exhaling slowly, and Ronan put one hand briefly on the dog's neck and felt the steady warmth of him, that uncomplicated animal weight that had been the most reliable thing in his life for the last 4 years, and took a breath. 17 miles to Dunmore. They had 17 miles to figure out the rest. He pulled off the road at a boat launch 3 miles outside of town. Vivian looked at him. "Why are we stopping?" "Because if I'm right about the tracking, We can't bring the laptop into Marsh's office. He got out, went to the back of the truck, came back with the toolkit he kept behind the rear seat. He opened the laptop case without touching the power button, laid the machine flat on the tailgate, and spent 90 seconds examining the chassis, the port covers, the battery seam. It was in the battery compartment, barely larger than a fingernail, flat, adhered to the inside of the battery housing with what looked like epoxy. A passive RFID tracker, not GPS, no active signal, but close-range readable from the right equipment. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it on the tailgate, picked up a half brick from the edge of the boat launch, and brought it down once, sharply. The tracker became several pieces. He dropped the pieces into the water. When he got back into the truck, Vivian was watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not quite respect, something closer to recalibration, like she was quietly revising a number she'd had in her head. "How did you know?" she asked. "I didn't. I suspected." He put the truck back in gear. They set that box up too fast and too clean for a visual tale. They had a position already, which meant they had a location feed, not just a sighting. The laptop was in the SUV all night. Yes, long enough for someone to get under the hood if they knew it was there and knew the code. He glanced at her. "Who gave you that laptop?" She was quiet for a moment. "My supervisor," she said. He didn't say anything. She looked out the window at the boat launch, the flat brown water, the cypress trees along the bank. "Okay," she said softly. Not to him, really. To herself. Closing a door. The kind of closing that didn't involve anger because the anger had somewhere further to travel before it arrived, and right now there was no time for the trip. "Okay," she said again. "Let's go talk to the sheriff." He pulled back onto Route 9, 14 miles. They drove them in silence, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the particular quiet of two people who had run out of variables to analyze and were now simply moving toward the only remaining option, carrying everything they had left, which was the card in her pocket and the dog in the back seat and whatever came next. The town of Dunmore appeared ahead in the gray morning light. A water tower, a grain elevator, a main street with 3 traffic lights, and somewhere on the north end of that main street, a county sheriff's office with a flag out front and a man inside who 19 years of living in this county had decided to trust. And Ronan Hale, who had been out of the Navy for 14 months and had driven past a ditch at the wrong moment on the right night, turned off Route 9 and drove toward it with his jaw set and both hands on the wheel, and Aries sitting up straight in the back seat like he already knew exactly how this was going to go. The Dunmore County Sheriff's Office was a single-story brick building that had been built in 1971 and hadn't changed much since. American flag out front on a pole that needed repainting. 2 cruisers in the lot, one with a cracked taillight that someone had repaired with red tape. A hand-lettered sign in the front window advertising a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department that had happened 6 weeks ago and nobody had taken down yet. Ronan parked on the street rather than the lot. Old habit, always know your exit before you commit to a position. "How do you want to do this?" he asked. Vivian had been quiet for the last 4 miles, not the exhausted quiet of someone running out of fuel, but the concentrated quiet of someone organizing their argument. She had her jacket zipped and her posture as straight as the wound would allow, which was not perfectly straight, but was straighter than it had any right to be. "I go in first," she said. "Alone. That's not... I'm a federal investigator walking into a county sheriff's office. If you walk in behind me with a dog, it looks like I needed an escort, and it immediately raises questions about what I couldn't handle myself." She glanced at him. "The questions I need Marsh to be asking are about Silver Creek, not about who drove me here." He thought about it. She wasn't wrong. 5 minutes, he said. "If you're not back at that door in 5 minutes or you don't signal me, I'm coming in." "What's the signal?" "Anything visible through the front window. Wave, nod, drop something. I'll be watching." She opened the door and got out. He watched her cross the parking lot with the careful, controlled movement of someone who had decided that showing pain was not currently an option. She pushed through his front door without hesitating. He sat in the truck with the engine off and watched the window. Aries put his chin on the center console. "I know," Ronan said. Inside, the front desk was staffed by a woman in her 40s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead who looked at Vivian the way you looked at someone who had clearly had a very bad night and was trying not to show it. "I need to see Sheriff Marsh," Vivian said. "It's urgent." "Is this regarding a complaint or—" "It's regarding an active federal investigation. My name is Vivian Cross. I'm with the Federal Investigative Division." She set her badge on the desk. She'd found it in her jacket pocket that morning, still there, still intact. "I need to see him now, not in 10 minutes. Now." The woman looked at the badge, looked at Vivian's face, and made a decision based on whatever she saw there. She picked up the phone without another word. Gideon Marsh came out of the back hallway 45 seconds later. He was in his mid-60s, the kind of man who had been large once and had settled into something more compact with age without losing the sense of accumulated weight. Gray hair cut short, a face that had spent a lot of decades outdoors and looked like it. He was in uniform. He was always in uniform during work hours. His department knew that about him. And he had the unhurried quality of a man who had learned a long time ago that rushing into situations before you understood them was how situations got worse. He looked at Vivian for a moment. "You're hurt," he said. Not an accusation, just a fact he was establishing. "I'll explain inside." He studied her for another second, then stepped back and held the hallway door open. Hashem. His office was small and cluttered in the specific way of someone who did real work rather than performed it. Filing boxes stacked in one corner. A whiteboard with a case map that he'd partially erased and not fully replaced. A desk with 3 coffee cups on it at various stages of empty. Family photographs on the wall. A county map. A framed commendation from 15 years ago that had gone slightly crooked and never been straightened. He closed the door and sat on the edge of his desk and looked at her with the patient expression of a man who had spent 2 decades listening to people tell him things. "Start wherever you need to start," he said. She started at the beginning. Not the very beginning. She was too experienced to waste his time with preamble. But at the point where the story became undeniable, Silver Creek Transport, the military logistics connection, the shipment routes, the names on the micro SD card. She laid it out in the flat, factual cadence of someone who had delivered field briefings before, and Marsh listened without interrupting once, which told Ronan something when Vivian described it to him later. Most people interrupted. Most people had questions they couldn't hold. Marsh held his until she was done. "The card," he said when she finished. "You have it on you." "Yes." "And the laptop." "Also yes. The backup channel and the source files are on the laptop. The raw evidence, recordings, manifests, financial records, is on the card." He was quiet for a moment. Not processing, exactly. The information wasn't complicated, it was just heavy, and he seemed to be taking its weight seriously. "You said the internal review was filed by your direct supervisor." "Yes, which means bringing this through federal channels goes through him or around him, and going around him requires explaining why, which puts the whole chain at risk." "That's correct." "And the tracking device in the laptop?" "Destroyed. Confirmed before we came here." Marsh looked at her. "We." She hesitated one beat. "The man who found me last night. Ronan Hale. He's outside." "I know Ronan Hale," Marsh said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, more like a piece of a puzzle finding its place. "Malcolm's grandson." "You knew his grandfather." "Malcolm Hale built half the fence line on the east side of my property 30 years ago. Good man." He paused. "Ronan, I've seen around town, keeps to himself, ex-military. Navy K9. He's the reason I'm sitting here instead of in a ditch." She said it without ornamentation, as a fact. Marsh absorbed that, stood up from the edge of the desk and went to the window that faced the parking lot. He stood there for a moment, and Vivian watched him the way you watch someone making a decision that was going to cost them something. "If I move on this," he said, "I need to do it in a way that doesn't tip anyone inside this building who might have connections I don't know about. I've got 11 deputies. I'd bet my life on 4 of them without hesitation. The other 7 are good people, but I don't know their full picture, and in this situation not knowing is the same as not trusting." "How do you work a checkpoint with 4 deputies?" "Carefully." He turned from the window. The Silver Creek route. You said there's a scheduled movement? According to the shipment logs, there's a transport running through Dunmore County in the next 24 hours. Route uses the bridge on Highway 7. It's the only viable crossing for a vehicle of that size. She reached into her jacket and produced the micro SD card, held it out. Everything you need to establish probable cause for an inspection is on that card. Manifests that don't match, routing that doesn't make sense for the declared cargo weight, and 3 cross-referenced victim names from missing persons reports in this county specifically. He took the card, held it in his palm, and looked at it for a moment. That small thing, smaller than a thumbnail, carrying the weight of what was on it. You need a secure reader, she said. I have one. He looked up. Give me an hour. Ronan was on the 3rd careful survey of the street when the front door of the sheriff's office opened and Vivian leaned out and gave him a single nod. He got out of the truck. Aries came with him without being told. Inside, Marsh was in the hallway, and when he saw Ronan, he did something that caught Ronan slightly off guard. He extended his hand and shook it, the way you shook hands with someone you were meeting under circumstances that warranted acknowledgement. Your grandfather was a good man, Marsh said. Yes, sir, he was. You look like him, around the eyes. He released his hand. Come on back, we've got work to do. The back room he led them to was a conference room with a heavy table, 4 chairs, and a reader unit that Marsh produced from a locked cabinet and set up on the table without commentary. While it loaded, he went and got coffee, 3 cups, no ceremony, and set them on the table. He didn't ask Aries to leave. He looked at the dog for a moment, registered him, and moved on. That told Ronan something too. The card loaded. What followed was 2 hours that Ronan would later remember as the strangest of his life. Stranger than the deployment, stranger than the discharge, stranger even than the night in the ditch. The 3 of them sat around a conference table in a county sheriff's office in a small Gulf Coast town and went through the evidence piece by piece, Vivian walking Marsh through each file, each recording, each cross-reference, and Marsh asking the kind of questions that told you he had done investigative work before he'd become an administrator. Sharp questions. The kind that went to the edges of what was provable rather than the center of what was obvious. Ronan sat and listened and drank his coffee and watched Marsh's face as the full picture assembled itself. The face did not change dramatically. That was the thing about Marsh. He didn't perform his reactions. His jaw tightened once when the victim names from Dunmore County came up on screen. His eyes went still for a moment when the financial record showed the dollar amounts. That was about the extent of it on the surface. But something in his posture shifted, slow and irreversible, like a foundation settling, and by the end of it he was sitting differently than he'd been sitting at the start. Straighter, shoulders set, the particular alignment of a man who had made a decision he wasn't going to reconsider. The driver of the Silver Creek vehicle, he said. If we stop the truck at a legitimate checkpoint and the inspection finds the hidden compartments, does that give us enough for an arrest warrant on the logistics commander? Combined with what's on that card, yes, Vivian said. The manifests alone establish his authorization of the route. The financial records tie him to the shell accounts. If the compartments exist and contain what the pattern suggests they should contain, that's the physical corroboration that converts circumstantial to direct. And if the compartments are empty, they won't be, not on a scheduled run. But if they are, she met his eyes. Then we have a very good case and a slightly longer timeline. Marsh nodded slowly. And the federal side. Your contact, the one you trust, can he receive the evidence through a channel that bypasses your supervisor? He's already standing by. The moment we have the checkpoint result, he moves to a federal judge he trusts for the warrants. That judge has no connection to my department's chain of command. He's district court, appointed 11 years ago, clean record. She paused. It's not a perfect system. No, Marsh said. It never is. He stood up. I'm going to make some calls, people I trust, off their department phones. I need you two to stay in this building until I tell you otherwise. Ronan looked at him. You need anything from us? I need you to eat something if you haven't, and try not to look like you've been living in a swamp for 18 hours. He glanced at Vivian. And I need you to let my desk officer look at that wound properly. She was a paramedic for 12 years before she came to work for me. Vivian started to object. It's not a request, Marsh said, and walked out. The desk officer's name was Patrice, and she had the brisk, unsentimental efficiency of someone who had treated injuries in parking lots and kitchens and on the sides of roads at 2 in the morning and was not impressed by stoicism. She redressed Vivian's wound in the small bathroom off the break room while Ronan sat in the hallway outside and ate a gas station sandwich that Marsh's youngest deputy, a 23-year-old named Ellis, who had the eager sincerity of someone who had not yet been disappointed by the job, had brought without being asked. "You want another one?" Ellis said. "I'm okay. The dog can have some. I've got turkey." Aries accepted 2 slices of turkey with dignified restraint. "He's really calm," Ellis said, watching the dog. "He's working." "He doesn't look like he's working." "He never does." Ronan finished the sandwich. "That's the point." Ellis nodded thoughtfully, the way young people nodded when they were filing something away. He went back down the hall. From inside the bathroom, Ronan could hear the low murmur of Patrice's voice and Vivian's occasional responses. And under it, the sounds of the building. Phones, boots on linoleum, the particular acoustic flatness of a government building that had been the same temperature for 40 years. He thought about Gerald Purcell standing in the road with his hands visible and his voice calibrated to sound like reason. He thought about the tracker in the laptop battery housing. He thought about his supervisor, Vivian had said. "My supervisor gave me that laptop." The anger that should have come with that thought was strangely absent. Not because it wasn't warranted, but because he'd seen this shape before. People who worked inside institutions and found that the institution had grown something rotten in its walls. The shock of it was a specific kind of shock. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow, corrosive kind. The kind that made you go quiet and re-examine every conversation you'd had in the last year and wonder which ones had been genuine and which ones had been management. He'd seen it happen to good people. The ones who stayed inside and tried to fix it usually got crushed. The ones who walked away usually spent the rest of their lives with a specific kind of distance in their eyes. Vivian was trying for a third option, and it was costing her blood to do it. He respected that without finding the words for it. Patrice came out of the bathroom. "She'll live," she said, with the flat delivery of someone for whom this was high praise. "She needs antibiotics she isn't getting, and a surgeon she isn't going to see for the next several hours. So what she needs to do is not move around more than necessary and not get shot again." She looked at Ronan. "You did decent field work on that dressing." "I've had some practice." "I can tell. The packing technique is military." "Yes." She considered him for a moment with the assessing look of someone who categorized people efficiently. "You're Malcolm Hale's grandson." "Yes, ma'am." "He used to bring his dog in here sometimes. Old yellow lab. Sat right where yours is sitting." She looked at Aries. "Malcolm was a good man to have around when things got difficult." She went back down the hall without elaborating. Ronan looked at the spot where Aries was sitting and felt something move through his chest that he didn't examine too closely. Marsh came back at 11:40 in the morning. He came back with a specific energy. Not agitation, but the compressed, forward-moving quality of someone who had gotten their ducks in a row and was ready to start firing. He set a printed sheet on the conference table. A route map. Highway 7, the bridge crossing, 2 miles of approach on either side. "Silver Creek vehicle is on schedule," he said. "My contact at the way station confirmed it passed through Baylor County at 10:15 this morning, which puts it at the Highway 7 bridge between 1:30 and 2 o'clock this afternoon." He looked at Vivian. "The manifest says it's carrying agricultural equipment, weights listed at 42,000 pounds. "For agricultural equipment," Vivian said. "For agricultural equipment." "That's light." "That's what I thought." He put his finger on the map. "I'm going to set a checkpoint here, 1/4 mile before the bridge. Standard equipment inspection, routine for oversized loads on this road, which is true. We do inspect on this stretch regularly because the bridge has a weight restriction and Silver Creek knows that, which is why their paperwork is always clean." He paused. "The inspection will be conducted by myself and 3 deputies. The other 4 on duty today will handle a situation on the south end of the county that I'm about to manufacture." "What situation?" Ronan asked. "There's a property dispute on Hanlon Road that has been simmering for 6 months, and that I have been strategically not resolving, because resolving it would require me to rule against someone who doesn't deserve to lose, and there's no good legal outcome. Today it's going to require 4 deputies and several hours. He said this with the deadpan precision of a man who had been administering pragmatic justice in a county for 2 decades. Ellis will coordinate. Ellis is 23, Ronan said. Ellis is 23 and he's the best natural mediator I've hired in 10 years. He will be fine. Marsh looked at Vivian. What do I look for in the compartments? The manifest will list cubic footage for the equipment. The actual internal dimensions of that truck should be larger than what the manifest allows for. You're looking for sealed spaces, under the floor decking, inside false walls at the front of the cargo area. They're not sophisticated. They don't need to be when the paperwork is never supposed to be questioned. And the driver. The driver will have a clean CDL, legitimate employment history, and probably no awareness of the full operation. These networks compartmentalize deliberately. The drivers often know they're carrying something off-book, but not what. She met Marsh's eyes. The driver is not the end of this. He's the beginning of the next part. Marsh nodded. I'll keep that in mind. You need to record everything from the moment you make the stop. Body cameras, dash cameras, all of it running. Chain of custody has to be clean from the first second or the lawyers will find the gap. I know how to run a stop, Miss Cross. I know you do. I'm telling you anyway because the people on the other end of this have very good lawyers and they will use every procedural inch available to them. Fair enough? He folded the map, looked at Ronan. You're staying here. Yes. You have objections to that? No. Marsh studied him for a moment. You're easy to work with for someone who just rammed a vehicle off a highway. I try to read the situation. He picked up the printed map in his radio from the table. I'll call in from the checkpoint. Patrice will relay to you. He looked at Vivian one more time. If this goes the way the evidence says it should go, you'll have what you need for the federal warrants within a few hours. And if it doesn't go the way the evidence says, then we regroup. He said it with the practical simplicity of someone who had operated in the space between what should happen and what did happen for long enough that he'd stopped finding the gap surprising. But the evidence is what it is. I've been doing this a long time. I've looked at a lot of documents. Those documents are real. He walked out. The building settled into a different kind of waiting. Active, pressurized, the waiting of something about to be decided. Vivian sat at the conference table with the laptop open and her secure channel running, her contact on standby, her fingers very still on the keys. Ronan stood at the window that faced the parking lot, watching the street. At 12:40, Marsh's cruiser left the lot with 2 others behind it, moving north toward Highway 7 without lights, without speed, just 3 county vehicles doing their ordinary county business. At 1:15, Patrice's voice came over the office intercom. Checkpoint is set. Sheriff says 10-4. Vivian's hands moved to the keyboard. At 1:47, the intercom crackled again. Vehicle is at the checkpoint. Ronan turned from the window. Vivian's eyes came up from the screen. They looked at each other in the particular way of 2 people who had moved through 24 hours of everything going wrong, and were now standing at the moment when everything either turned or it didn't, and there was nothing left to do but wait for it. Aries lifted his head. The building was very quiet. The clock on the conference room wall read 1:49, and then 1:50, and then 1:51, and the ticking of it was the only sound in the room, and Ronan stood absolutely still and let the waiting be what it was. At 1:53, the intercom clicked on. Patrice's voice was level and professional, and underneath it, just barely, was the specific weight of someone delivering news they had not been certain was coming. Sheriff says to tell you, she said, the dog found something. Vivian was already typing before the intercom clicked off. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the focused urgency of someone who had been holding a loaded question for 24 hours and had just received the answer. The secure channel to her contact was open, the connection established, and she was transmitting before Ronan had fully processed what Patrice had said. He stood at the conference room door and listened to the building around him. Phone starting, movement in the hallway, Patrice's voice on another line now, professional and clipped. The ordinary sounds of a small department doing something that was not ordinary at all. Talk to me, he said to Vivian. Transmitting now. Evidence package, checkpoint confirmation, vehicle ID. She didn't look up. My contact moves to the judge the moment he receives this. Federal warrant request for the logistics commander, Silver Creek transport executives, and the internal review files on me. She paused, reading something on screen. He's already in position. He's been waiting since this morning. How long for the warrants? Hours, not days. The judge was briefed in general terms this morning. My contact did that without telling me, which I should probably be angry about, and am currently not. She typed another line. 2 hours, maybe 3. And in the meantime, Marsh has a truck with hidden compartments on a county highway and a driver who is about to have a very difficult conversation. She finally looked up. And we wait. He didn't sit down. He went back to the window and watched the street, and Aries came and stood beside him, and the two of them did what they had always done best, which was hold a position and pay attention. Marsh came back at 4:17 in the afternoon. He came in through the back entrance with his 3 deputies behind him, and even before he reached the conference room, Ronan could read the result in his posture. Not triumphant, Marsh didn't have a triumphant setting, but resolved in a way that was different from the resolve he'd carried going out. Heavier, somehow. The weight of having looked at something directly that you'd been told existed but hadn't yet seen. He set a manila folder on the conference table and sat down heavily in the chair across from Vivian. Hidden compartments, he said. 2. One under the floor decking in the forward third of the cargo area. One inside a false wall behind the cab. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs. He'd printed them at the checkpoint on the mobile unit. The forward compartment had transport records, coded schedules going back 14 months, route manifests with a separate numbering system that doesn't correspond to any legitimate freight designation I've ever seen. He set the photographs out one by one. The rear compartment had names, handwritten, on a legal pad inside a sealed plastic bag. He set the last photograph in front of Vivian. She looked at it without touching it. The photograph showed the legal pad, the handwriting visible, columns of names, dates, what appeared to be reference numbers beside each entry. How many? She said. 63 names on the pad, some with dates going back almost 4 years. He paused. 11 of them match names on your micro SD card. The rest, he stopped. The rest I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. The room was quiet for a moment. The driver, Vivian said, in custody. He lawyered up inside of 2 minutes, which tells you he knew enough to know he needed one. But before he did, he said 4 words. Marsh looked at her steadily. He said, I want a deal. He'll get one. I told him that was above my authority, but that I would convey his willingness to cooperate to the relevant federal authorities, which seemed to satisfy him enough to stop talking. Marsh closed the folder. He knows names. I could see it on him. Men who know nothing don't ask for deals that fast. Vivian's phone. Marsh's deputy had retrieved it from evidence lockup. It had been in her jacket at the crash. Showed 3 messages from her contact. She read them in sequence, and Ronan watched her face as she did. Warrants, she said. Federal. Signed 40 minutes ago. She set the phone down. 3 for Silver Creek transport executives. 1 for the logistics commander. She stopped at the last message. Read it twice. What? Ronan said. My supervisor, she said. There's a warrant for my supervisor. She looked up, not at Ronan, not at Marsh, just at some middle distance. His name is Lawrence Hurd. He's been with the agency for 22 years. He has a daughter who just started college. She said the last part quietly, not because it was relevant to the legal situation, but because it was the part that made it real in a way that criminal charges alone didn't. He signed off on my internal review 4 days ago. He put a tracker in my laptop. He fed my route to the people who shot me. She picked the phone back up. And apparently he has been running interference on 3 other investigations over the past 2 years that are now being reopened. Marsh looked at her carefully. You okay? No, she said. But I'll be okay later, which is enough for right now. He accepted that, stood up. I need to coordinate with your contact on the federal side. Chain of custody, transfer, evidence handling, the driver's cooperation agreement. He picked up the folder. This is going to be a long night. I know. You should eat something. You're the second person to say that to me today. Then it's probably true. He moved toward the door, stopped, looked at Ronan. You know you didn't have to be any part of this. Ronan met his eyes. I know. Most people would have called it in and driven away. Most people didn't have Aries. Marsh looked at the dog, who was sitting at Ronan's left side with his characteristic stillness. Something moved through the old sheriff's face. Not sentiment exactly, but the recognition of something that didn't have a simple name. No, Marsh said. I suppose they didn't. And he walked out. What followed was not cinematic. That was the part nobody told you about the end of things. The part after the hinge moment, when the mechanism started turning and the results began to produce themselves, was largely logistical and slow, and conducted in fluorescent-lit rooms by people on phones. Federal agents arrived in Dunmore at 6 in the evening. 4 of them, 2 vehicles, professional and efficient, and treating Vivian with the specific careful deference of people who were aware that the situation involving her was complicated and were going to let the paperwork sort out who owed whom an apology. She was taken to a hospital in Caldwell City under federal escort, which she accepted without argument for the first time since Ronan had known her, because she was running on empty and her body had begun communicating this in terms that weren't subtle. Before she left, she came and found him in the break room where he'd been sitting with Aries and the remains of a coffee and a very old magazine about recreational fishing. She stood in the doorway for a moment. I don't know how to do this part, she said. What part? The thanking you part. I've been trying to figure out what to say since this morning, and I haven't come up with anything that doesn't sound... She stopped. Insufficient. You don't have to say anything. I know I don't have to. I want to. She looked at him with the direct, unguarded quality she only showed when she was very tired or very certain of something. You didn't know me. You didn't know what I was carrying. You just stopped. Aries stopped, he said. I just followed. She looked at the dog. Aries looked back at her with his calm, complete attention. Thank you, she said. To both of them, it seemed. Ronan nodded once. Go get fixed up. Working on it. She started to turn, stopped. The 41 names on the card, plus the 63 on the pad. Some of them overlap, but not all. She faced the door. Someone's going to have to find the ones that don't overlap. Find out what happened to them. A pause. That's going to take a long time. I know. It's the part of the job that doesn't end. He didn't have anything useful to say to that, so he didn't say anything. And she walked down the hall and out the back door, and he heard the federal vehicle's engine start, and then the sound of it leaving the parking lot, and then the building was quiet again, in a different way from all the other ways it had been quiet that day. The arrests happened across a 48-hour window. Lawrence Hurd was taken from his office at the federal building in the state capitol at 7:40 the following morning, while he was in the middle of a phone call that investigators would later determine was an attempt to reach someone who was already in custody. He did not resist. Witnesses described him as very still, the way people got still when the thing they'd been dreading for months finally arrived, and the dread was almost a relief by comparison. The Silver Creek transport executives, 3 of them, a corporate structure of careful distances and documented deniability, were arrested at separate locations within a 4-hour window. One of them had apparently been attempting to access an offshore account when agents arrived, which told you something about what he'd known was coming and what he'd prioritized in the face of it. Colonel Warren Stell, the logistics commander, his name was on the warrants and on the micro SD card, and in Vivian's recordings, his voice calm and businesslike and specific, in the way that voices were specific when they were recorded without the speaker's knowledge, was arrested in his own office at Beaumont Station at 2 in the afternoon. The arresting agents were military investigators working in coordination with federal authority. He had been at his desk when they came in. His aide said later that Stell had looked at the warrant for a long moment and then set it down on the desk and stood up and said, with the flat precision of a man who had practiced composure his entire career, I'll need to call my attorney. That was the only thing he said. Ronan read about it in fragments over the following days, things Marsh told him, things that appeared in the regional news, things that filtered through the town of Dunmore the way information filtered through small towns, which was thoroughly and not always accurately, but with an emotional precision that the formal record never quite captured. He had stayed in Dunmore, not because he'd decided to, not in any formal sense, but because leaving required a specific motivation to go somewhere, and he didn't have one, and the bait shop above which he rented his room was there, and the truck needed some work after what he'd done to it on the highway, and the fence he'd been building on the east side of his grandfather's property needed finishing before the weather changed. He went back to the cabin 3 days after everything broke, not for any operational reason, just to go. He stood on the back porch and looked at the waterway where the searchlights had moved through the cypress trees and thought about the shape of the last several days. Not the events themselves, but the shape of them, the underlying architecture. How a dog pressing his paws against a dashboard had been the difference between 41 names becoming 42, and all the other calculations that proceeded from that single moment of a Tuesday night on a rural highway in bad weather. He didn't spend long on it. That kind of thinking had limits. Push it too hard, and it became either grandiose or paralyzing, and he didn't have the appetite for either. Aries waded into the shallows of the waterway and drank and shook himself, and looked back at Ronan with the expression he wore when he was asking whether they were leaving or staying. 5 minutes, Ronan said. The dog went back to examining the reeds. Vivian called him 11 days after the arrest. She was out of the hospital, 2 surgeries, the first for the original wound and the second to address something the first surgery had missed, which she described with clinical brevity. She was at her apartment in the state capital. She sounded tired in a specific way, the way people sounded tired when the adrenaline that had been holding them together for months had finally drained out and left the actual human underneath. They reopened the other 3 investigations, she said. The ones Heard was interfering with. 2 of them are solid. They'll move to prosecution within the year. The 3rd one is more complicated because the evidence was compromised from the beginning and rebuilding it takes time. How long? Long. She paused. The driver from the Silver Creek truck gave a full statement. 14 months of routes, specific contacts at 4 locations, names of 2 other drivers who were running the same operation on different schedules. Another pause. The federal task force is using his statement to map the full network. There are more components than what I uncovered. It's bigger than the micro SD card. Are you going to be on the task force? A silence. I've been offered a position, yes. Are you going to take it? I haven't decided. He could hear something in that non-decision. Not reluctance, not uncertainty, but the particular weight of someone who had paid a high price for something and was still determining whether the next version of it was worth the same terms. The internal review on me has been formally closed and expunged. That happened yesterday. She said it without particular emotion. 22 years of Lawrence Heard's career is going to produce a very detailed record of who he protected and who he undermined, and which cases never made it as far as they should have. Some of those cases involve people who are still in the system waiting for outcomes that should have been different. That's going to take years. Yes, most of the things worth doing take years. She stopped. How are you? The question caught him slightly off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because of how plainly she asked it, without the social scaffolding people usually built around that question. Fine, he said, working on a fence. A fence? East side of my grandfather's property. The posts need replacing. A short silence. That sounds like something you chose deliberately. Maybe. Are you going to stay in Dunmore? He looked out the window of the bait shop at the street below, at the water tower visible at the north end of town, at the flat Gulf Coast sky going orange at the edges with the late afternoon. I don't know, he said. Probably for a while. Marsh spoke well of you, she said. To the federal team. He was specific about what you did and how you did it. He put it in his official report. I didn't ask him to. No, that's why it means something. She paused one more time. I'm going to take the position. I decided just now while I was talking to you. I don't know why I needed to say it out loud to figure it out. Sometimes you do? Yes. A breath. Thank you, Ronan. I know I said it already. I'm saying it again because the first time was under duress and this one counts more. He looked at Aries, who was lying on the floor beside the bed with his chin on his front paws. "Stay safe," he said. "Working on it," she said. And the line ended. Chummed. The story made the regional news, and then the national news, and then became one of those stories that lived for several weeks in the particular way that institutional corruption stories lived, widely reported, earnestly discussed, and then gradually absorbed into the background noise of everything else that was happening in the world. The victims' families were another kind of story, and that one ran longer and quieter and in places that didn't always have reporters present. 41 names from the card, 63 from the legal pad, 27 overlap, 77 distinct individuals. Families who had been told, or had told themselves because the alternative was unlivable, some other story about where their person had gone. That process of revision, of reclaiming the truth of what had happened, was not something that happened in a press release. It happened in living rooms and on phone calls, and in the offices of victim advocates who understood that being given an answer was not the same as being given something you could rest in. Ronan knew about this in the distant way that you knew about things that were happening at the edge of your life rather than the center. He finished the fence. He took a roofing job north of Dunmore that lasted 3 weeks and paid reasonably well. He had dinner at Marsh's house one evening in late October, just the two of them and Marsh's wife Carol, who talked about her garden with the same focused authority that her husband brought to everything else. And they ate pot roast and didn't talk about Silver Creek or warrants or anything that had happened on or after that Tuesday in the storm, except once when Marsh, pouring a second cup of coffee after dinner, said without preamble, "You handled yourself well." And Ronan said, "You ran a good operation." And that was the full extent of the debrief they ever had. He drove out to the cabin on a Sunday in November when the weather had turned and the cypress trees were doing their seasonal thing, losing their needles, going rust red, looking like they were dying when actually they were just adjusting to the cold. He sat on the porch for a while. The waterway was flat and silver, and the only sound was the wind in the reeds. He thought about what Vivian had said on the phone. Most of the things worth doing take years. He thought about Patrice saying Malcolm had been a good man to have around when things got difficult. He thought about Aries on the dashboard, both paws pressed together, certain about something before Ronan even knew there was something to be certain about. He pulled out his phone and found the number for the federal task force that Vivian had sent him 3 weeks ago with a message that said only, "in case." He looked at it for a long time. The particular form of "in case" she meant was clear enough. In case you want to do something with what you know. In case the fence and the roofing jobs aren't the whole answer. In case the thing you're good at is also the thing the situation needs. He put the phone back in his pocket. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Maybe eventually. He'd figure it out. Aries came and leaned against his leg, that small, uncomplicated weight, and they sat there together on the porch of Malcolm Hale's cabin and watched the light go out of the sky over the black cypress wetlands, the water going from silver to gray to black. The first stars appearing through the cypress canopy, ordinary and reliable and completely indifferent to everything that had happened beneath them. The predators were in custody, the names had been counted, the fence was finished, and on a Tuesday night in the rain, a man had stopped when he had every reasonable reason to keep driving. And that one decision, that single unremarkable choice made in the dark on an empty road, had been enough to pull a thread that unraveled something that had been hiding inside respectability for years. Nobody makes history by looking for it. Most of the time, it finds you on a road you've driven 100 times, in weather you didn't plan for, asking only whether you're willing to stop.